come to call the righteous, but sinners to change their hearts and lives. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, it is great to be back home. As much as I love travel and we go to some bucket list places from time to time, it's always nice to be back home, to sleep in your own bed, and for me to be back here with my people. It's great to be with you today and to be back here and to join in worship with you. I'm grateful to everybody who, whenever I am out of town, keeps things running. Thank you for all that you do to help us to gather in worship together. We're talking about meals, about gatherings, right? I recall one time I got an invitation. I was in college, right? So I'm 21 years old, and I got invited to this dinner at my professor's house. And it was not uncommon. I went to a college that was smaller than my daughter's high school, right? And so it was not uncommon for us to get together with professors at various times. And I got together in what a 21-year-old college student shows up in, right? I was wearing a T-shirt and a flannel shirt over that, and my nice jeans that were only kind of ripped, and my tennis shoes that had both of their soles on them. They weren't the ones that the soles were falling off of. And I showed up, and I realized that I was one of the few students there, and everybody else was in a suit and tie. And I wondered if I was in the wrong place. And at first, as I walked in, I had this feeling that perhaps I ought to turn back around and go back home. You ever feel like that? You wander in and you're very clearly not quite up to snuff. But immediately after I walked in, my professor walked up to me and started a conversation with me and started introducing me around the room and sharing with others some of the work that I was doing with him, and making me to feel welcome in the place, just as I was. We're talking about meals. Often when we think about Jesus and meals, right, we think of this. We think of the Da Vinci scene of the Last Supper with everybody sitting on one side of the table, and it's Jesus and the 12 apostles, and y'all, this ain't it. Right? Like, number one, we know that it wasn't just the 12 of them. Whenever we hear stories about Jesus, he's very rarely just with the 12 of them. He has the women who often aren't mentioned but fund everything. Right? Luke tells us, in fact, that the women, Mary Magdalene and others, funded Jesus' ministry. So if they're going to gather for a meal, we know the women are there because they're picking up the check. And we know that probably there are children who travel with the families as well. We know that some of the other disciples were probably there. So this isn't quite it. But I love to think about this image, and you may not be able to see it. It's small. It's by an artist named by the name of Paulo Veronese. It's not well known. It's called Jesus Dines at Levi's, or Jesus Eats at Levi's. Paulo Veronese. It's from 1570. And see if I can pull in a little bit here. This we recognize, right? This looks like that Last Supper scene. That's in the middle there. But if you go off to the edges, it starts to look a little more crowded. And you notice the guys with turbans. In 1570, who wears turbans? Muslims. There's Muslims at Jesus' table. And on the other side, there's this group of guys. And you might not be able to see up on the screen, but they all have a glass and are enjoying themselves. Paulo Veronese got called in front of the Inquisition for this painting because it was scandalous to depict Jesus eating with Ottomans and, in the words of the Italians, German drunkards. And he had to write a statement about the painting explaining it because they found it offensive that he would depict Jesus eating with these sorts of scandalous people. Talk about missing the point. I think this might be the best painting of Jesus at a meal that I've ever seen for just the reaction that it produces. Jesus offends people by who he eats with. That's the point of that story about Levi today. Levi, sometimes known as Matthew, the tax collector. Jesus offends people by who he invites to the feast. All sorts of people who, like me at 21 years old, show up and feel like perhaps they don't belong, but Jesus makes them feel included. Because perhaps being invited to the meal of Jesus is less about who we are and more about who Jesus is. Perhaps being invited to the banquet feast of God is less about what we have done and more about who God is. And we miss the scandal of it when we bring it into our respectable churches and places. Levi. This picture is from The Chosen. One of the better depictions of the life of Jesus in the Chosen series, but I like it because it gives us some modern images to talk about. So this is Levi the tax collector. A little bit about what it meant to be a tax collector. Remember that Israel, that Judah at that time, was a nation under occupation. And the tax collector is collecting money from his neighbors for the Romans. The word that we use for such people is collaborator, right? The word that we use for such people is traitor. The word that we use for such people is Benedict Arnold, right? That's the sort of person that Levi was, and that's the offense that the Pharisees, the scribes, and those other religious leaders encounter. Imagine sitting down in Gaza and welcoming a soldier of the IDF to your table. Imagine sitting down in an immigrant home in Minneapolis and welcoming an ICE agent into your home. This is what Jesus does when he welcomes Levi. It's not just that Levi was a little bit dishonest. All of the tax collectors then were a little dishonest. You didn't have 1040s to fill out, right? The tax collector just told you how much you owed. And the tax collector made his income by telling you more than you actually owed, so that he could keep the change difference, which is why tax collectors always did well for themselves. But it's more than that. It's that he was this collaborator who worked alongside the Romans, the occupiers, who worked alongside the people who were working against the kingdom of God, who worked alongside the people who were oppressing and persecuting God's people. And that's who Jesus goes to dine with. And Levi, of course, has a different sort of friend than good religious folks. And so there are other tax collectors and sinners there. And they grumble. Luke likes that word. They grumble and complain. You hear the same thing in Luke 15. Luke 15, Jesus is eating and dining 10 chapters later, and the good religious folks say, why can't he eat with Sunday school teachers? Why's he got to eat with those sex workers, the OnlyFans content creator? Why's he got to work with the drug addict? Aren't there nice people in this town he can eat with? And Jesus tells a series of stories. We know them pretty well, right? The 99 sheep and the lost one. The woman and the lost coin, and most expansively, the story of the prodigal son. Those are all told in response to this offense that people have to Jesus and who he eats with. Because who we eat with says something about who we are. Who we spend time with says something about who we are. God's invitation is offensive. Again and again and again and again. Jesus shows up in the places that we don't expect him to. And we read these stories. And the church again and again does this same thing, right? Where if we sit down and we just tell the story of God in the same way the Bible does, good religious folks often go, you can't do that. That's political. That's offensive. That's not polite. That's the wrong sort of faith and the wrong sort of person for you to advocate for and to hang out with. But again and again, God's invitation is offensive because it's not about who we are, it's about who God is. There's not a requirement to come to the feast. The feast is an invitation again and again. Grace offends. I spent, again, we were on this trip, and one of the highlights for me, I didn't put any pictures in here, one of the highlights with me is not something that a lot of people have on their agendas when they travel to Egypt, right? If you're going to travel to Egypt, what do you want to go see? The pyramids. What else? The Sphinx. Fantastic. That's day one. You're done. The Nile River. Great. There's 2 more days. That's 3 days. One of my favorite parts of the trip is when we are in Aswan at the end of the river cruise. When we're in Aswan, we go to a Nubian village. Nubians in Egypt are a minority group. They're a people without a place. They are an ethnic group that lives in between Egypt and Sudan and is not really welcomed in either. And much like when TVA flooded much of the Appalachians, when the Aswan High Dam was built in 1973, they flooded the river, the river behind the dam, but also all of these villages where these people lived, and so they were displaced people as well. So we traveled down the river about 45 minutes by a little boat, and we stopped off at this village. And there was this nice resort across the river, but we turned left instead of right, and we walked into this desolate little village, this depressing-looking village, frankly. Walked up a dirt road, and El Mondir welcomed us into his home. He didn't ask anything of us as we walked in. He just wanted us to experience his life, experience his world. And so we were invited to feast. He didn't know us. He had not met us. But he offered us refreshment and conversation and time together so that we could get to know him. There was no requirement, only an invitation. For many of us, it was the highlight of the trip. And we eventually did take up a collection and do some things to help Mondir and his family and others in that community. That's part of why we go. But also that the hospitality he offered was not dependent on what we had done. It was a reflection of who he was. God's hospitality does not depend upon us. God's hospitality is about who God is and not who we are. God's grace is not earned by us, it is served. This is the issue that we run into. In the rest of our lives, you get what you deserve. Who is welcome are the people who have earned the right to be there. And God's grace is served to all people regardless. Can I take just a minute? Is that all right? Go from preaching to meddling a little. This last week, the President of these United States posted an image of a former President of this United States and his wife as primates. There is a strain of thought among us of European descent that has been around for hundreds of years that believes that somehow we are better than, that there are other humans that are less than human. That's what it means to depict them as primates, that they are less than human, less evolved than us. That's the heart of all racism in America. The belief that some other people are less than human. That's what happens often to our friends, the Nubians, and why they live in the situation that they do. They believe there are others in that country who believe that they are less than. That's why this country was able to enslave millions of people, 4 million by the end of slavery, 10 million in total over the course of those 200 years, because they believed that those people were not human and they did not count. And this is how we wind up restricting who is welcome at the table, because we believe that they are less than. It is not just a political statement. It is not just a joke or a meme. It is a moral statement about who we believe our neighbor is. And as people of God, we believe that our neighbors, each and every one of our neighbors, is made in the image and the likeness of God. All of them, period, without exception, is made in the image and likeness of God. Oh. And that gets us in trouble if we live it out, friends. That got Jesus in trouble when he lived it out. Why did he welcome Levi to his table? Because he believed Levi was a child of God. Why did he welcome those prostitutes, those sex workers, those sinners, those offensive people to the table? Because he believed that they were made in the image of God. And God's invitation does not depend on what we have earned. It depends on who God is. God's grace is not earned by you and I by being good, upright people. It is served to us as a gift. God's grace is not earned. It is served to us as a gift. We're called to reflect on this moral theological statement. Who is not welcome at our table? Who would make us uncomfortable if we sat down at God's table and they were sitting across from us? Who have we failed to welcome to God's table? Who can we open the door for so they can come in to the feast? Grace can be offensive. Grace is countercultural. The voices in the world want you, desire for you, need for you to view your neighbor as less than you. Need for you to view your neighbor as less than human. Need for you to engage in the sort of dehumanization that allows us to hate and despise our neighbor. But the banquet of God calls us to invite. The banquet of God calls us to receive what we have not earned and to share it with all whom we meet. To receive what we have not earned and invite others to take part in this great gift that is for all people. For grace is not earned, it is served.